Hey kids, what time is it?
It's kind of like watching TV, but, in your car.
What's going on, Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens? It is another riveting edition of Dark Side of the Stream.
You always catch me when I'm having my protein shake.
Yeah, well, I try to get him early while he's his freshest. But yes, Jay and I like to dive into some of the most incredible documentaries in Dark Side of the Stream, which you can always download as a podcast on our 104.7 The Cave app. And Jay picked this week's episode once again. He's been on a run ever since.
I've been on fire and fuego,
you
man.
Dropped the ball on.
Wait, I did not drop any balls. No, Sasquatch was our greatest episode ever.
It was awful.
Sasquatch was our greatest episode ever.
Awful.
By the way, I got a Sasquatch from my tree, a peking Sasquatch. That's
one of those
that's another episode.
What are those like walking
plastic thing?
Yeah, oh, really?
You bolt it to a tree, and he's looking around the tree. Yes, he's looking around the tree. Why does it keep on making sound even though
we're trying to get out the bugs here, doing video and audio at the same time, and I think we're going to get better as we go along. So
hopefully we get better.
We get better as we go along.
I'm still trying to figure out what's going on.
I know, me too. So obviously today we are going to talk about the pick Jay had. It was called Charles Manson: The Final Words, actually narrated by Rob Zombie.
Yeah, that's what made me click it right there.
You're a California boy. How did you tell me your experience with Charles Manson?
I just always heard the stories or whatever, and the ranch, and all that, the movie ranch, and that was more like my mom's era, because I was born in '69, so
tell me about the movie.
My mom could have got sucked into that world,
you think she could have been into,
I would not have
children?
been surprised at all,
Really?
Man. She was a little flower child.
The crazy thing about the Manson story, and we're going to get into this, is that I don't want to ruin it. I'll go my first, knowledge of Charles Manson was Axl Rose. You remember when he used to wear that Charlie Manson T-shirt?
I do.
And
he wore several controversial shirts.
Yeah, and at the time it was. Now that we know a lot more about that case and stuff, it's not so crazy that he actually wore a shirt, because when I was a kid, I was like, oh my God! Why would you wear this dude?
Yeah.
He was a serial killer. He was so evil. He killed all these people. Oh my God! Why is Axl Rose like these people? Well,
he didn't kill anybody.
As far as we know, he may have killed somebody. For one.
Yeah, he may have killed a gangster guy.
He may have been there for one, which was actually a drug deal.
Kind of admitted to that one. Yeah, a drug deal gone bad.
And
he was going to get killed, so he
felt like you first before me. But
somehow he's in jail was in jail for
up until the end of his life
for all these murders.
The story of Charles Manson is actually a very sad one, and we will start that next Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Springfield's pure classic rock, 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio talking Charles Manson on this week's episode of Dark Side of the Stream.
I'm a little tanner this week. It doesn't look quite so bad on the camera.
Let me ask you, what did you learn after watching this documentary about Charles Manson?
Well, I kind of knew a lot about this. Basically, the documentary talks about here was the state's case against him and what they said he did, and here's the reality and the facts and probably what really happened. And he kind of got railroaded by the prosecutor and stuff like that,
to say the least.
Right. But there's another guy that's got a book out, and which is also becoming a documentary, I guess, eventually. That's he went really, really deep into this, and as far as like the government hand in hand, like there was a lot of shady stuff with Manson and the government and the police, and he was part of the acid testing, and so things are not as they seem.
Usually when it comes to that type of stuff, it is not as it seems. I actually, when I went west a couple years ago, we drove old Route 66 all the way to San Diego and back. There's a podcast to drop names, last podcast on the list. They did a 5-part series about the Charles Manson murder case and the family. And I felt like since we were driving through the desert, what a better time than to listen to it.
Yeah.
So that's where I knew most of the stuff that they talked about in the final words, but I think it's important that more people understand that yes, Charles Manson definitely did some not so great things. And he was not a saint by any means, and he could have been involved in at least one murder, but that was not what he was convicted of. You really got to start with the fact that this guy was institutionalized from the get-go. He was born without a name. His mom didn't even give him a name when he was born. By the time he was an early boy, I think like 10 or 11, he had run away from home. Then he was institutionalized in boys' homes where he was sexually assaulted, molested, raped until he got older and started doing it himself to other boys. But as you know, Charles Manson's stature, he was not a very big guy at all. He was a little dude. So, the term little man's disease, he definitely had a little bit of that. So he spent his time in and out of jail throughout most of his developmental years. Then he gets released in the late 60s. And at the time when they released him, he didn't want to be released. He's like, what the hell am I supposed to do?
This is the life I know.
This is all I know is to be in prison. This is all I know. So they released this guy, late 60s, and he goes to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. He got all these flower children, and all these chicks are just loving up on him. And he
did get a lot of action that day.
He's like, oh my God, these chicks, after being institutionalized for a long time, and you get out and all these chicks are like, we want you, we want you. So they end up taking a group of them and they go to a defunct movie ranch, and that's where the fun starts. And we'll get to that next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Springfield's Pure Classic Rock, 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio. It is Dark Side of the Stream.
This one is a dark one, too.
This one is a dark one. It's Charles Manson, The Final Words, narrated by Rob Zombie. It's for free on YouTube. We didn't want you to have to pay for this one.
Yeah, free on YouTube. It's amazing.
You should watch it if you're not familiar with the case. Bottom line is, after we were talking about, he takes these kids out to the mansion. They start taking lots of drugs, a lot of drugs, more specifically psychedelic drugs. It's a constant drug, acid-fueled party with a lot of sex involved, and they're basically having one of the girls sleep with the guy who owned that defunct movie set studio. It was like a ranch.
Whatever, right?
She's banging them so they can stay there. Well, eventually things start coming to a head, right? And at the time, Charles Manson was familiar with this church called, it was like the sect. We talked about it in a previous episode, the Berkowitz killer. That they basically,
Son of Sam one.
Yeah, he knew about this religion that was kind of an offshoot of Scientology that basically said man is evil and we need to wipe him off the face of the earth. And so he took that idea and he was like, hey, you know what, guys, we should go out to the desert. Well, all these hippies are like, are you crazy?
They want to start their own little world out there, man.
Well, at first they didn't want to go. They were all against it. Manson was the only one that wanted to go out there.
He had the master plan.
And he was like, okay, well, how do I keep banging these young girls and how do I keep them in on the thing? So he basically says, you know what? The end's coming. We're going to start a race war. That's how we're going to go to the desert. And so essentially told the Tex, who was definitely involved in the majority of all the killings and was pretty much the one who did it all, goes out and they commit the murders and then it's game over. All Charles Manson wanted to do was to keep the party going. It just got out of hand. But then you look at, from the state's perspective, how can you explain this former star football player Tex? He goes into California, he starts taking drugs, he kills people. These girls they were valedictorians, they were cheerleaders. How did they do? What happened? Oh my God. People go wrong all the time, but in their minds, the prosecutors had another plan, and we'll get to that next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. 104.7 The Cave is Springfield's Pure Classic Rock. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens. It's Dark Side of the Stream, and we are discussing Charles Manson, The Final Words, narrated by Rob Zombie, and for free on YouTube.
For free on YouTube. And it has some really good insight into because they go side by side with the two cases. This is all the facts. This is the timeline, what happened. This is the state's case against Charles Manson, and it didn't add up, but
It kind of got through. It was like the proto satanic panic before the satanic panic of the 80s, where you would turn on daytime television, you'd watch Geraldo or whatever the hell dude's name is, talking about Satan worshipers. You watch Unsolved Mysteries, you talk about Satan worship.
Good name for a band.
You're
Good name for a
listening to
band.
Motley
Satanic
Crue,
Panic.
you're worshiping Satan. Well, before all that, Charles Manson was kind of the poster boy for this, because the state and all the people around it couldn't explain how all these kids who used to be hippies just went insane and started killing people. Well, if you find out what Tex actually did to his mind and all the drugs that he took, which they definitely go into in last podcast, it's an insane amount. you can see why he would be clinically insane after all of that stuff. And most of the girls that were with him
Makes
also
bad choices.
They were taking a lot of LSD and a lot of other psychedelics that they shouldn't have been taking. And if you are already borderline schizophrenic or you borderline have some kind of behavioral issues,
it can crack that little switch.
Boom, you're done.
Yeah.
And bottom line is this: if you really look into the case of Charles Manson, they could not definitively prove that this man was responsible for any murder, let alone
very weird.
The Bianca murders or anything else. They could not prove that he was there. They wanted to prove that they wanted to prove that someone was behind all of this. And ultimately, they put a man behind bars for the rest of his life without having any evidence whatsoever. It was all panic driven. It was
Very
all media driven.
for sure.
And it breaks your heart. I mean, I don't want to sit here and champion
Yeah, it does
Charles
sound like
Manson.
you're buddies with Charlie.
I'm not doing that at all. I already said that he's not a great guy. I already said that he's no saint at all.
The crimes he was charged for doesn't seem like
No.
it was the crimes he committed.
And in this country, we've talked about this so many times, and this was probably one of the first, not the first time, but one of the biggest ones. Guilty until proven innocent. He knew the score. He knew when the media was there, and he played into it too. It's not like he didn't play off of it.
For sure.
But for a guy who wanted to go back to prison and that's all he knew, that's exactly what he got. You know what I mean? And it's a sad story.
And he got fortune and fame. I'm not fortune, but he got fame.
He got fame.
Maybe he got money. I don't know, but definitely got fame.
Yeah, he got married. And
the fame he wanted.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to be a rock star. That's why he was working with the Beach Boys, which was kind of, I think, how some of those murders, what happened is because there was a bad deal going down on the music song. He wasn't getting money for a song, got promised something, didn't get it.
Yeah, that whole story.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, the Wilson's connection.
The Wilson thing is crazy because also he was a singer-songwriter, and his music's not great, but it's not bad either. It's not horrible by any means, but it was like the late 60s, and he was still playing like Peter, Paul, and Mary stuff, like early 60s folk rock stuff, which he thought was still kind of the thing, but definitely was not. So, in my opinion, the Charles Manson thing is a huge miscarriage of justice. How many hits of acid are you going to give? How many hits of acid do we give it?
I'll give it a 3 just because it was cool. It was nothing special, but
3 hits of acid?
Yeah, 3 hits of acid.
I'd give it about 3.5. It was cool to hear Rob Zombie narrate the thing.
Yeah, that was cool. It was an interesting take on it. I'm really curious for the next one that's going to come out based off this dude's book that's just got...
Even
book
more
came out 6 months ago or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
It's he goes deep in the files and stuff, and the case files and the timelines. And
we're gonna have to dive back into it once it comes out.
Once that one comes out.
Well, it's my turn next for the next episode of Dark Side of the Stream.
Here's where stuff goes downhill.
You have a week to watch this baby, and it's going to be called Black Holes, The Edge of All We Know, which is going to get very scientific. It's going to get a little mathy, but
Neil
the best part is,
deGrasse Tyson?
I don't know if he's the one who does it.
Is he running this show?
But it's going to be a lot of information since we just kind of figured out, or figuring out the stuff behind black holes. I figured I'd give us a little bit of a science lesson. As always, you can download these episodes of Dark Side of the Stream on our 104.7 The Cave podcast or online at 1047thecave.com. Keep watching and learning, and we will see you next week, Dark Side of the Stream, right here on 104.7 The Cave.